The bag was black. It was one of those large garbage bags, the kind you use for yard waste or old junk you want gone. My mother held it out to me the way you hold something toward a stranger, not a daughter. I was 16 years old that day. It was my birthday. And she told me with no tears and no hesitation that she was done. I stood outside in the cold with that bag at my feet, and I made myself a quiet promise right there on the front step. I told myself I would never let someone hand me a garbage bag again. Not in the literal sense, not in any sense. It took 10 years, a rented room, 2 jobs, one very unexpected phone call, and a decision that changed everything, but I kept that promise. Before this story goes any further, I want to ask you something. If your own mother did this to you, handed you a bag, locked the door, and walked away, would you ever let her back in? Would you help her? Would you even answer the phone? Keep that question in your mind while you hear what Patricia went through, because the answer is not as simple as you might think right now. My name is Patricia. I am 26 years old now, and I own a small catering business that keeps me busy from Thursday through Sunday most weeks. I have a one-bedroom apartment that I pay for myself, a savings account I built from nothing, and a life I am genuinely proud of. None of that sounds dramatic, I know that. But when I tell you where I started, you will understand why those ordinary things mean everything to me. I grew up in a house that looked fine from the outside. 3 bedrooms, a yard, a neighborhood with sidewalks. My mother, Deanne, worked as an office manager for a dentist. She was organized, presentable, and well-liked by people who did not know her well. My father left before I was old enough to remember his face clearly. I have a photo of him holding me as a baby, but the memory is not there. It is just a picture. He sent birthday cards until I was around 9, and then he stopped. My mother never explained why. She just said he was unreliable and moved on from that conversation every time I tried to open it. So it was the two of us. And then when I was 7 years old, my mother started dating a man named Gerald. Gerald was not a bad person on the surface. He worked at a hardware distribution company, drove a clean truck, and never raised his voice. But Gerald had 2 daughters from his previous marriage, Tamara and Keely, who were 9 and 11 when he came into our lives. And from the first weekend those girls visited our house, I understood something without anyone saying it out loud. I understood that space was being rearranged, not just the physical space of the house, but the space inside my mother's attention. There was now a version of my mother that belonged to Gerald, and alongside that version, a version that was working very hard to earn the love of his daughters. What was left for me was whatever remained after all of that. I do not say this to create sympathy. I am saying it because understanding that shift explains everything that came after. I watched my mother slowly become someone who needed Gerald's approval the way a plant needs light. She smiled differently when he was in the room. She cooked the foods his daughters preferred. She rearranged the living room for their comfort. She signed Tamara up for dance classes and drove 40 minutes each way to get her there twice a week. When I asked for new school shoes, she said we needed to wait until the budget allowed. When Keely needed a new backpack, it appeared the next day. I was not a difficult child. I want to be clear about that. I got good grades. I stayed quiet. I helped with dishes. I did not create problems, but being invisible in your own home creates its own kind of quiet desperation. I learned to not ask for things. I learned to find my own snacks, do my own hair, and solve my own small problems without involving my mother. Because involving her usually led to either a distracted half answer or a comment about how I needed to be more understanding of the family situation. The family situation, that was the phrase, as if I was not part of the family, as if the family was Gerald and his girls and my mother, and I was something adjacent to it that needed to be patient. By the time I was 13, Gerald and my mother were essentially married in every practical sense except legally. He spent most nights at our house. His daughters had a shared bedroom that used to be the guest room. I had my original room, though it had grown smaller somehow, not in size but in feel. It felt like a space I was permitted to use, not one that truly belonged to me. Tamara was 4 years older than me and treated me like a piece of furniture she had learned to walk around. She was not mean in the explosive way. She was dismissive. She talked over me at dinner. She borrowed things from my room without asking. When I mentioned it to my mother, she said Tamara was us being a teenager and I should try to connect with her. I tried once. I knocked on the shared bedroom door one Saturday morning and asked if Tamara wanted to watch a movie with me. She looked at me with the particular blankness of someone who had already calculated that you were not worth their time and said she was busy. She was on her phone. Keely was closer to my age, 2 years older, and she had perfected the skill of being sweet in front of my mother and cold when they were not watching. She would say things like, "Your hair looks cute today, Patricia," in a tone that managed to sound like an insult. She would leave me out of conversations and then look surprised if I said anything about it. When I was 11, she told one of her friends on the phone that my mother liked her more than her own daughter. I heard it through the wall. I went back to my room and I did not cry about it. I just filed it away. I was already learning that the truth, even when it hurt, was more useful to hold on to than to cry over. I turned 16 on a Thursday in late November. It was a school day. I had been quietly hoping my mother might do something small to acknowledge it, even just a card or a cake. She had remembered my birthday every year before this one, though the celebrations had grown smaller and less focused on me as the years passed. This year, Gerald's older daughter Tamara had just gotten accepted to a nursing program, and the entire household had been buzzing with excitement about that for 2 weeks. My birthday had barely come up. The morning of, my mother wished me a happy birthday when I came into the kitchen, then immediately pivoted into a conversation with Gerald about Tamara's celebration dinner that weekend. I went to school, I sat through my classes, I came home. There was no cake on the counter, no decoration, no card on the table. Gerald was in the living room watching something on television. Kaylee was in the shared bedroom. My mother was in the kitchen on the phone. I changed out of my school clothes and sat on my bed. I am not going to describe the particular quality of that sadness, because anyone who has ever been forgotten on their birthday understands it without explanation. It is not a loud grief. It is a quiet deflation, like air leaving something slowly. About an hour later, I heard my mother come upstairs. I thought she was coming to my room. She wasn't. She went to the shared bedroom and I heard her laughing with Keely about something. 20 minutes passed, then she came to my room. She stood in the doorway. She did not come in. She stood in the doorway and looked around my room with the expression of someone inspecting a space they are reconsidering. Then she said she needed to talk to me. Her voice was flat, like when she was about to tell me something she had already decided and did not want to argue about. She said Gerald's daughters were going to be living with us full-time now. She said Tamara would still have the shared room, but Keely needed more space. She said the plan was for Keely to take my room and for me to move into the small storage room at the end of the hall, which barely fit a cot and had no closet, only shelves on one wall. I sat with that for a moment, then I asked, on my birthday. My mother blinked. She said, "What does your birthday have to do with this?" Something happened in me in that moment. Not rage exactly. Something colder than rage. Something that had been building for 9 years without a name finally got one. It was clarity. I saw the full picture at once, not just the edges I had been allowed to see. I saw that I had been patient and small and quiet and helpful for 9 years, and it had not changed anything. I saw that my room, my space, my birthday, and my basic right to be seen were all just things that could be rearranged when they inconvenienced the arrangement. I told my mother I was not going to move into the storage room. I said it clearly and without drama. I said I lived here and that was my room and I was not giving it up. The argument that followed lasted about 15 minutes. Gerald came upstairs at some point. He did not say much, but he stood there with my mother and that said everything. Tamara appeared in the hallway. Keely appeared behind her. I was standing in my own room facing all four of them in my doorway on my 16th birthday, and I understood with a kind of crystalline certainty that this had been decided before this conversation started. I was just being informed, not consulted. When I refused again to move out of my room, my mother's face changed. The flatness shifted into something harder. She told me that if I was going to be this difficult, then maybe I needed to find somewhere else to stay. She said it like it was a logical next step in a reasonable conversation. She said it like she was an exhausted adult managing an unreasonable teenager, not a mother standing in the doorway of her daughter's bedroom on her daughter's birthday. She went to the closet. She pulled out a large black garbage bag. She opened it with a snap, the way you open them when you're about to fill them with something disposable, and she started putting my clothes into it. My clothes from my drawers from my side of the closet. Gerald did not stop her. Tamara and Keely watched. I stood there. She filled the bag, tied the top, handed it to me, and told me to go stay at a friend's house until I could be reasonable. Then she walked downstairs. Gerald followed her. Tamara and Keely went back to the shared room. I stood in my bedroom doorway holding a garbage bag with my clothes in it on my 16th birthday. I walked downstairs, I put on my coat and my shoes. I picked up my school backpack from near the door, which still had my textbooks and my small coin purse with $11 in it. I picked up the garbage bag, I opened the front door, I stepped outside. The door clicked shut behind me. I heard the lock turn. I stood on the front step in the cold November air for a few minutes. I looked at the garbage bag, I looked at the door, then I picked up the bag and I walked. I called my friend Rosaria from the gas station 2 streets over. Rosaria was 14 and lived with her grandmother, a woman named Cora who was in her 60s and small and fierce and kind. I told Rosaria what happened. I did not cry on the phone. I told her in plain sentences, the way you tell someone facts. Rosaria said hold on and put the phone down, and I heard her talking to Cora in the background. Then Rosaria came back and said to come over. Cora met me at the door. She looked at the garbage bag, she looked at my face. She did not say anything dramatic. She took the bag from me, put it inside, told me to sit down and put a pot on the stove. She made rice and beans and poured me a glass of juice and sat across the table from me while I ate. At some point she said, "You're going to be all right," in the same tone she might say it's supposed to rain tomorrow, not as a comfort, as a fact. I believe that was the first time in years that an adult had looked at me and spoken to me like my future was something real and solid. I slept on Rosaria's couch that night, and the next night, and for the next 3 weeks while Cora quietly made calls and figured out the situation. My mother did not contact me, not a text, not a call. I checked my phone every morning when I woke up and then put it face down so the absence wouldn't be the first thing I looked at. Cora eventually spoke with a social worker she knew through her church. Because I was 16, the options were limited but not nothing. There was a program for young people in what the social worker called housing instability, which was the formal way of saying my mother had effectively put me out. Cora offered to be my temporary guardian, and given the circumstances and my mother's silence, the paperwork moved forward. My mother signed the temporary guardianship papers 6 weeks after my birthday. She did not call to explain or apologize. She did not ask to see me. The social worker told me my mother had said in the meeting where she signed that I was a difficult teenager who needed structure she was not equipped to provide. She used the word difficult, the same word she used the night she handed me the bag. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Difficult. I was a 16-year-old girl who refused to give up her bedroom on her birthday. That was the full extent of my difficulty. I finished high school living with Cora and Rosaria. Cora was not a wealthy woman. Her apartment was small and she was on a fixed income, but she managed things carefully and she never once made me feel like a burden. She expected me to contribute. I cleaned, I cooked, I helped with groceries when I could. She expected me to go to school and keep my grades up, and I did. I was not going to waste what she was giving me. Junior year, I started working weekends at a diner 2 miles from the apartment. Cora drove me the first few times and then I took the bus. I learned to make change fast, carry 4 plates at once, and smile through whatever the customers brought. The head cook there was a man named Henry who had been in the restaurant business for 30 years. He noticed I was curious about the kitchen and started showing me things during slow hours. He showed me how to build a sauce, how to season properly, how to manage a prep station. I stayed late some Saturdays just to learn. Henry said once, during a quiet Sunday morning before the rush, that cooking was the most honest work he knew. You either made something good or you didn't. There was no pretending. That sentence went somewhere deep in me. I graduated high school with a 3.7 GPA and a plan. I had saved almost $3,000 from the diner. I enrolled in a culinary certificate program at the community college 2 towns over. I kept working at the diner. I moved into a rented room in a house R'd by 4 other young people, which cost me $450 a month and came with a tiny closet that was entirely mine. I put my clothes in it on the first day and stood back and looked at them for a minute. Nobody touched those clothes, nobody moved them, nobody put them in a bag. Over the next 3 years, I worked, studied, and built. I finished my culinary certificate. I started doing small private catering jobs on the side, birthday parties and baby showers and office lunches, building a client list one satisfied customer at a time. I got my food handler's certification and my business license. I saved. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment at 21. I named my catering business Second Table because everyone deserves a seat. I thought about that name for a long time before I chose it. It meant something to me personally that I kept mostly private. But anyone who ordered from Second Table and then came back, which most of them did, they understood without explanation that this was food made with intention, not just skill, intention. I did not hear from my mother during any of this. Cora passed away when I was 20. She had a stroke one evening and was gone by morning. Rosaria called me and I drove to the apartment and we sat together in the kitchen where Cora had fed me rice and beans on one of the worst nights of my life. We sat there a long time. I said to Rosaria, she told me I was going to be all right. And Rosaria said she was right. Cora's death made something shift in me, not toward my mother. I was not suddenly running back toward the woman who had put my clothes in a garbage bag and locked the door, but it made me sit with the question of what I owed to the people who had actually shown up for me and what I owed to myself. I had been so focused on building forward that I had not looked back very often. Cora's passing made me look back. And what I saw was a girl who had survived something she should not have had to survive, and had built something real with the materials she had been left with. I kept building. By the time I was 23, Second Table was doing well enough that I had cut back to part-time at the diner. By 24, I had left the diner entirely. I had a small commercial kitchen space I rented 3 days a week, a website, a growing Instagram page, and a list of repeat clients that included 2 small companies who used me for their quarterly office events. It was not a large business, but it was mine and it worked. I had also during this time begun quietly reconnecting with the idea of family. Not my mother, not Gerald's household, but I had found through some searching a cousin on my father's side named Delia who was a few years older than me and lived 2 states away. We exchanged messages for several months before speaking on the phone, and when we did speak, it was like discovering a room in a house you thought you knew completely. Delia was warm and practical and funny, and she had her own complicated story with that side of the family. We started talking regularly. She visited me once and I cooked for her for 2 days straight, and she said she had never eaten so well in her life. She became, in the quiet way that real family works, one of the most important people in my life. My cousin Delia was the one who told me about the call before it came. She said, Patricia, I heard from someone in your mother's circle that she has been having a hard time. I do not know the details. I just thought you should know it might be coming. I thanked her and filed it away. I went back to work. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March, 4 months after Delia's warning. I was in the commercial kitchen prepping for a Thursday event, 32 people, a retirement dinner, when my phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was a number I did not recognize. I almost did not answer. I answered. It was my mother. She had got my number from somewhere. She did not explain how. She said my name first in a voice I recognized, but that sounded older, worn down at the edges. She said, Patricia, and then she paused. I held the phone against my shoulder and kept chopping. I said hello. She said she was sorry to call out of nowhere. She said she had been meaning to reach out for a while. She said things had been difficult. She said Gerald had left about a year and a half ago. She said Tamara and Keely were both living their own lives and were not very present. She said she had been alone. She said she had some health issues, nothing too serious, but enough that things were harder. She said she needed help. I listened. I kept my hands on the cutting board and I let her speak. I did not rush her. I did not interrupt. I did not make it easy by filling the silence, because I had spent a very long time filling silences that should not have been mine to fill. When she finished, I asked her what kind of help she needed. She said she was behind on her rent, 3 months behind. The landlord had sent a notice. She said she had applied for some assistance programs, but they were slow. She said her car had broken down and the repair cost was more than she had. She said she was trying to get back on her feet, but it was hard to do everything alone. I noted the word alone. The same woman who had filled a garbage bag with my clothes had just told me it was hard to do everything alone. I did not say that out loud. I said, let me think about what I can do. I told her I would call her back in a few days. She said thank you. She sounded surprised I had not said no immediately. She sounded surprised, and that said something about what she expected from me and what she expected from herself. I hung up and stood in the kitchen for a few minutes without moving. Then I called Rosaria. I told Rosaria everything. Rosaria was quiet through most of it, and then she said, how do you feel? Not what are you going to do, how do you feel? I said I felt complicated. I said I felt something that was not quite pity and not quite anger and not quite sadness, but was something that sat between all three. I said I also felt clear, clearer than I expected to feel. Rosaria said, what does clear feel like right now? I said it felt like knowing what I was not going to do. I was not going to give my mother money without conditions. I was not going to rescue her quickly and quietly so that she could feel like the hard part was over. I was not going to pretend the garbage bag never happened. But I was also not going to leave her completely without a response, because that was not who I was. Rosaria said, that sounds like you. I called my cousin Delia that evening. I told her about the call. Delia had heard more details through the family grapevine. She told me that Gerald had left my mother for a woman he had been involved with for a couple of years before the separation, that Tamara was living across the country and visited maybe twice a year, that Keely had moved away and had a boyfriend her mother did not like, and that the arrangement my mother had built her entire life around had quietly collapsed. The office manager job had ended about 8 months ago. The dental practice had closed. My mother had found some part-time work, but nothing stable. I listened to all of this. Then I asked Delia the question I had been holding since Tuesday morning. I said, do you think she's a different person now? Delia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I think she's a tired person now. Whether she's different, I honestly don't know, but I think she genuinely needs help, and I think you're the only person she actually trusted enough to call. That last sentence stayed with me. She had called me, not Tamara, who was established and employed, not Keely, who was geographically closer, not a friend from work or someone from church. She called me, the daughter she had put outside with a garbage bag. I did not know if that meant she was desperate or if it meant she knew, somewhere inside herself, that I was the only person who had ever actually been reliable. Maybe both. I took 3 days to think. I sat with the question the way Cora used to sit with problems, quietly and for as long as it took. I went about my work, I made food, I cleaned my kitchen. I sat in my apartment in the evenings with tea, and I thought about what kind of person I wanted to be about this. Not what my mother deserved, what kind of person I wanted to be. That is a different question, and it led me to a different answer. I called my mother back on a Friday afternoon. I told her I was willing to help, but that I needed her to understand some things clearly first. I told her I was not going to wire her money without knowing exactly what it was going toward. I told her I would speak to her landlord directly and arrange to cover 2 months of back rent, not 3, because I needed to see good faith effort from her on the third. I told her I could not replace her car, but I could help her research low-cost repair options. I told her I would check in once a week. And then I said the harder thing. I said I am willing to do this because I choose to, not because I owe you. What happened when I was 16 is not something we have ever talked about, and I am not asking to do that now. But I want you to understand that I remember it. I remember the bag, I remember the door locking, I remember my birthday. And the help I'm offering you now is coming from who I chose to become, not from anything that was given to me. Silence on the other end, a long one. Then my mother said, Patricia, I know. 2 words, no apology built into them, no defense, just acknowledgement, and somehow those 2 words said more than a prepared speech would have. I said okay, and we talked through the practical details. Over the following weeks, I handled the back rent. I spoke to the landlord, a woman named Mrs. Ackerfer who was polite and businesslike and took the payments without comment beyond gratitude. I helped my mother find a mobile mechanic who quoted a significantly lower repair price than the shop had. I checked in on Fridays. The calls were short at first, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Practical, the weather of a relationship that had not yet decided what it was. Slowly, over several weeks, the calls got a little longer. My mother started asking questions about my life. Real questions, not surface ones. She asked about my business by name. She asked how I had gotten into catering. She asked about my apartment. She asked about Rosaria. Once she asked about Cora. She said she had heard Cora had passed and she was sorry she had not said anything at the time. I said thank you. She said Cora was a good woman. I said yes, she was. There was a long pause and then my mother said, I should have been better to you. Not an apology exactly, not a full reckoning, but a sentence that cost her something to say, and I knew it. I held it in the way you hold something fragile that you are not sure yet what to do with. I said, I know. And that was where we left it that day. The conversation that I had been not having with my mother for 10 years did not happen in one dramatic moment. It happened in pieces over months during Friday calls that stretched from 5 minutes to 20 to sometimes an hour. It was not a clean resolution. Relationships that have been broken for a decade do not get clean resolutions, but it was movement, honest movement. My mother told me more about those years after I left. She said she had convinced herself at the time that I would come back and things would settle down. She had told herself that I was being dramatic. It took her about 6 months, she said, to understand that I was genuinely gone, that I was not coming back. And by then, the situation at home had shifted into a different kind of problem, and she had put her focus there instead of on what she had done. I asked her once directly why she had picked Gerald's daughters over me consistently for all those years. Why it was always my room, my birthday, my needs that got rearranged. She did not answer right away. Then she said I wanted him to stay. And I thought if his girls were happy, he would stay. I thought I was building something. I just did not notice what I was taking apart to build it. I sat with that. It was not a satisfying answer. It was not an answer that fully explained how a mother hands her daughter a garbage bag, but it was an honest one. And honesty from my mother was something I had waited a very long time for. Gerald left anyway. After all the accommodation, all the rearranging, all the years of choosing his comfort and his daughter's approval over her own daughter, he left for someone else. He did not even fight over the house when he left. He just went. Tamara and Keely, the girls my mother had bent her entire family structure to please, called occasionally and visited rarely. The arrangement had been held together by a man who eventually walked away from it, and when he left, the whole structure he had occupied collapsed in on itself. I did not say I told you so. It would have been true, but it would have been cruel, and I had decided what kind of person I wanted to be about this. There was a conversation we had about 8 months into the Friday calls that I want to tell you about because it is the one that mattered most to me. It happened because of something small. My mother had mentioned in passing that she had driven past the old neighborhood and stopped for a moment outside our old house. The new owners had painted it a different color. She said it looked smaller than she remembered. I asked her if she had gone inside. She said no, she just sat in the car. I asked her what she thought about while she sat there. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I thought about your room. I thought about how I cleaned it out that night. After you left, I put your things in order. I folded the clothes. I thought about how I had put them in a bag, and I sat in the car outside that house and I was ashamed. Patricia, I was ashamed of myself, not because things got hard later, but because of what I did to you. That was wrong. It was wrong and you were 16 and it was your birthday and I was wrong. I had waited for those words for 10 years. I did not cry on the phone. I held the feeling carefully and said, I hear you. I said, I appreciate you saying that. My mother said, I know I don't deserve your help. I know I don't deserve your time, but I am grateful for it. More grateful than I know how to say. I said, I know, Mom. It was the first time I had called her Mom in 10 years. She heard it, I heard her hear it. The situation with my business during this same period continued to grow in ways I had not predicted. A local magazine ran a small feature on independent caterers in the area, and Second Table was included. The piece was short, just a paragraph and a photo, but the response surprised me. The inquiry tripled over 2 weeks. I had to make decisions quickly about capacity, pricing, and whether to bring on help. I hired 2 part-time assistants. I renegotiated my commercial kitchen rental to add a 4th day. I raised my prices for new bookings by 20% and no one blinked. Rosaria, who by now was finishing her degree in social work, helped me think through the logistics of growth without losing the quality that had made Second Table worth growing. She was methodical and clear-eyed in a way I deeply respected. We sat at my kitchen table more than once with spreadsheets and notebooks, working through numbers. Rosaria's grandmother had taught her, the same way Cora had taught me, to not be afraid of honesty even when the numbers were hard. I thought about Cora often during those months. I thought about what she had said, sitting across from a 16-year-old girl with a garbage bag, that I was going to be all right. I wished she could see the kitchen space. I wished she could see the retirement dinners and the baby showers and the Friday afternoon calls and the one-bedroom apartment where my clothes hung in a closet that nobody touched. In the spring of the year I turned 26, two things happened that I did not expect. The first was that my mother asked if she could visit. Not to ask for anything, just to visit. She said she wanted to see me. She said she thought it was time. I thought about it for a full week. I talked to Rosaria, I talked to Delia. I sat with it at night in my apartment, then I said yes. She arrived on a Saturday morning. She had taken the bus, which was a 3-hour ride. She was thinner than the last photo I had seen of her, and her hair was different, cut shorter. She stood on my doorstep, not with a bag this time, but with a small container of food. She said she did not know what else to bring, and she had made a sweet potato pie because she remembered I liked it. I had liked it when I was a child. She remembered. She had held on to that detail for 10 years inside a mind full of things that had gone wrong, and she had brought it to my door. I let her in. We sat at my kitchen table and I made coffee and she ate the pie she had brought and I ate a piece too. We talked for 3 hours, not about everything. Not a full accounting of all the years and all the harm, but real talking. The kind where two people are actually present with each other, not managing each other or defending themselves or waiting for the other person to stop. She asked to see my kitchen. I showed her the commercial space photos on my phone and she looked at each one for a long time. She said, "Patricia, you did all of this." She said it like a fact, but also like a question she was asking herself. I said I did. She said, "I can see Cora and how you work." I was not expecting that. I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Cora used to cook like she meant it, like it was a statement. I can see that in what you do." She paused. She said, "I'm glad she was there for you when I wasn't." I had to put my coffee cup down. I said, "Me too." The second unexpected thing that happened in the spring of my 26th year was Tamara. I had not spoken to Tamara in 10 years. We were not connected on social media. We did not share mutual friends who might pass messages. She existed in my memory as a girl who had looked through me for most of my childhood, and I had placed her there and left her. She reached out through my business Instagram account. She sent a direct message that started with, "I don't know if you remember me." I almost laughed at that opening because the idea that I might not remember her was almost impressive in its lack of self-awareness. But I kept reading. She said she was a nurse now, working in a pediatric ward in a hospital across the country. She said she had been following Second Table for a while without saying anything. She said she had heard from her father, Gerald, that my mother had gotten in touch with me and that I had helped her. She said she found out about it because Gerald had called her to mention it, in the self-serving way that people mention things to make themselves feel less guilty about their own absence. Then she said something I did not expect. She said I was not kind to you when we were growing up. I wasn't mean in the obvious ways, but I knew what I was doing and I knew it wasn't right. I was a teenager who felt like she was competing for something and I decided you were the competition. I am not asking you to forgive me. I just wanted to say it clearly because I have been carrying it around for years and I think you deserve to hear it. I read that message 3 times. I thought about what to say for 2 days. I did not rush it. I had not rushed any of this. I wrote back, I said, "I appreciate you saying this." I said you were a teenager in a situation that adults had created and put all of you in. That does not excuse everything, but it does explain some of it. I said I held no acti. V resentment toward her, that I had put most of what happened in a drawer a long time ago because keeping it on the table was not useful to my life. I said, "If you're in the area sometime and want to try my food, the link is in the bio." She replied with a simple thank you and a heart. No performance, just that. Keely never reached out. I do not hold that against her. People move at the speed they move and not everyone gets there. I do not need her apology to be whole. I am whole. I built that wholeness one decision at a time over 10 years, starting from a front step in November with a garbage bag and $11. I want to tell you something about the garbage bag, not as a symbol but as a real object and a real memory. It was one of those extra large black bags, the 39-gallon kind, the kind you use for yard waste. My mother had pulled it from under the kitchen sink where we kept them in a box. The fact that she had to go get it, pull it out, open it, and fill it means she had to make a sequence of decisions. It was not a thing that happened in a single instant of emotion. There were steps. And she took all of them. I have thought about that over the years, not to maintain my pain but to understand it accurately. When you understand what happened to you accurately, you stop minimizing it and you stop exaggerating it. You just see it clearly. And clear vision is what you build from. I built a life from clear vision. I built Second Table from clear vision. I rebuilt slowly and on my own terms something that looked like a relationship with my mother from clear vision, not warm fantasy, not bitter distance, clear vision. My mother's health stabilized over the following months. She found more stable part-time work through a friend from her old office. She was not living comfortably, but she was managing. She called every Friday. Sometimes I called first. She started telling me small things, not just the hard things. She told me about a neighbor who had a dog that barked at 3 in the morning. She told me about a book she was reading. She told me she had started going to a community center on Tuesday evenings and had made a friend there named Ruby who made her laugh. I listened to all of it. I told her small things too. I told her about a difficult client at a corporate event who had changed the head count twice. I told her about a new appetizer I was testing that wasn't working yet. She asked questions, real ones. We were learning late how to actually talk to each other. It was imperfect and slow and sometimes uncomfortable. It was also real. I am not telling you this story to say that forgiveness is always the answer. I am telling you that I made a decision based on who I wanted to be, not on what anyone else deserved. Those are two different things and they lead to two different kinds of peace. One is conditional on the other person changing. The other is something you carry with you regardless. I want to be honest with you about one more thing before I get to the part of this story that I think matters most. There were nights in the first year or two after my mother called when I almost closed the door again. Not in anger, but in exhaustion. The weight of holding two truths at once, that she had hurt me badly and that she was a person in genuine need, is not a light weight. There were evenings when I sat in my apartment and thought, I do not have to do this. I could just not answer on Friday. I could let this fade out. Nobody would fault me. I did not close the door, but I want you to know I thought about it, because I want you to understand that what I chose was a choice, not a reflex, not a weakness, a deliberate, fully aware choice that I made over and over again. The event that I think of as the turning point in how the whole family understood what had happened did not happen in a private phone call. It happened in public, or at least, it happened in front of other people. My mother had begun in the spring, mentioning that she wanted to introduce me to a few people from her community center. She said it carefully, like she knew she was asking something. She said there was a small gathering at the center at the end of May, a kind of potluck and social afternoon, and she wondered if I would come, and maybe. She said this with a kind of shyness that I had never heard from her before, bring something from second table. She said she had talked about my business to people there and she said, proud of me. Proud of me. I booked the date. I made 3 dozen of my rosemary chicken skewers, 2 trays of roasted vegetable flatbreads, and a batch of the lemon olive oil cake that had become one of my most requested items. I drove to the community center on a Saturday afternoon with everything packed and labeled. My mother was waiting outside when I pulled up. She saw my car and she came to help me carry things in. She carried the cake. I carried the skewers. We walked in together. Her friend, Ruby, a woman in her late 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, came over immediately and said, "Is this Patricia, your catering daughter?" And my mother said yes. She said, "This is Patricia, my daughter." I had not heard her introduce me as her daughter without qualification in a very long time, maybe ever. She had always, when I was growing up, introduced me in ways that hedged. She would say my daughter Patricia with a particular energy that implied I was a category of person, a daughter, rather than a specific one she had chosen. That afternoon she said, "This is Patricia, my daughter," and she said it like she was proud of the sentence. Ruby shook my hand warmly and immediately pulled me toward a table to set up the food, and the afternoon was busy and full, and people kept coming back to the skewers and asking about the business. 3 people took my card. One woman asked if I could do a small retirement party for her husband in July. At one point during the afternoon, I looked across the room and saw my mother standing with a group of people talking. She was laughing. She looked lighter than I had seen her look in all the months of phone calls where her voice was still often carrying something heavy. In person, in a room full of people she had made friends with, she looked lighter. And she was watching me across the room with an expression I recognized. It was the expression of someone seeing something they had had a part in, even a distant part, even a part made mostly of absence, and feeling something complicated about it. I held her gaze for a moment, then I smiled. Not a forgiving smile or a complicated smile or a sad smile, just a real one. The kind you give someone when you have decided, after a very long time and a very long road, to simply be in the same room with them without the whole weight of history pressing down on the moment. She smiled back, and that was enough for that day. I drove home that evening with the empty trays and the printed card for the retirement party in July, and I thought about the front step in November. I thought about the garbage bag. I thought about the $11 in my coin purse and the gas station payphone and Cora's voice on the other end of the call Rosaria handed to her. I thought about the cot I had never slept on in the storage room. I thought about the tiny closet in my first rented room. I thought about Henry the cook showing me how to build a sauce during a slow Saturday morning. I thought about all the mornings I had woken up and decided, without anyone watching, to keep going. Second Table had 43 bookings on the calendar through the end of the year. Rosaria was helping me think through whether to hire a third assistant. My cousin Delia was coming to visit in August, and I had already planned the menu for her first evening. My mother called every Friday, and sometimes I called first. This is the part where I tell you what I know now that I did not know standing on that front step at 16. I know that what someone does to you is not the final word on what your life becomes. It is a fact in the story, not the ending. The ending is still being written, and you are the one holding the pen. I know that building something good is not revenge. It is not a statement directed at anyone. It is just the only honest response to being given nothing. I know that some people will be ready to see you clearly only after the life you built forces them to look. You cannot rush that. You can only build and wait and make your decisions about who you want to be in the meantime. I know that forgiveness is not a gift you give to someone else. It is a weight you put down for yourself. Some days you have to pick it back up again. That is normal. You put it down again, you keep going. I know that the garbage bag was real. I know that door was real. I know that birthday was real. None of those facts disappear because I chose to call my mother back. The truth of what happened lives alongside the truth of what I chose afterward. Both are mine. I am not confused about which is which. And I know in the clearest part of my heart that Cora was right. I was going to be all right. If you have ever been the person in your family who was treated like the most expendable one, the one who was rearranged, overlooked, handed the smallest piece, and told to be grateful for it, I want you to leave a comment below and tell me one thing you built after they counted you out. It does not have to be a business. It does not have to be money. It could be peace, distance, a single room that was entirely yours, a Friday call that grew from 5 minutes to an hour. Whatever you built, it matters. Share it below. Patricia's story is about what you can build from a front step in a garbage bag. What is yours?